Welcome to Copilot Zero to Hero Season 2. We're very excited to have you here. For those that haven't been here, welcome. If you are interested in all things a generic Copilot, the Copilot chat experience, head over to Copilot Zero to Hero. That's one word, copilot0tohero.co.za, and go grab the recordings there. If you are watching this video, chances are you've already headed over to the YouTube channel to consume this. You can see all of Season 1 there if you want to get to grips with Copilot chat experiences. I'm not sure if we've actually talked about agentic AI inside of that. Season 2 is here to focus on all things agents. So I think this is the agent edition. If you head over to copilot0tohero.co.za, you can see all 10 sessions that we will be presenting on over the next 20 weeks, running up until the 8th of September 2026. No, there won't be any MCPs for people like Reichardt that ask really shitty questions in the chat. But outside of that, we are okay. So today's session is really about getting to grips with understanding what an agent is, the concepts around where agents live, and also how you can build agents through. What did you say? And you subscribed today? No, Reichardt, I've got a little bottle that I spin here, right? And then I just pick on people that I've known from these little. Can I switch off notifications? Can I switch off notifications? Do we have a Teams mute notifications? Can I mute? I'm not going to click that button. Anyhow. So, yeah, today's session is really. Today's session is, can I mute notifications? Because these people are actually driving me batty. Mute notifications, settings, mute notifications. Let's see if this actually works. So today's session is really, and sorry for those that have already been here because Tracy didn't hit the record button, and this is being recorded now because I had to go hit the record button. Today's session is really about splitting up what agents actually do inside of the organization across 3 paradigms: answer, do, and operate. That's really what today's session is all about, so that you actually understand how agents work, or at least the concept of agents and how they work. This is also not specific. The framework that we are going to be talking about today is not specific to Microsoft Copilot. I'll be using the words Copilot, Copilot Studio, and Foundry, but you can take this framework and you can apply it to any AI that you want to use. So if you're going to do the Google stuff, you're going to do the Claude stuff, well, the Anthropic stuff, you're going to do the AWS stuff, this framework works. And the reason why we've built it that way, because Microsoft likes to change names. So we don't know if Copilot Studio is always going to be called that, or Copilot Chat, or even if Copilot's going to be called Copilot. We're not sure what that world looks like. This framework actually helps you understand agentic AI from an architecture perspective so that you can use it anywhere. For those that are here, thank you for showing up. When we look at who this is targeted at, it's really about being able to articulate messaging to C-levels inside of the organization. So level 100, why we have an answer, do, operate model, and the framework that supports building agents inside of your organization. It's also designed for makers, people that are getting started with, if you come from a Power Automate, Power Apps perspective, how do you move into Copilot Studio, or even Azure, I'm not going to call it Azure Foundry, just Foundry. It's not Azure AI Foundry, it's just Foundry. And then also, being able to look at some real world examples when we say answer, do, operate. What is a retrieval agent? What is an anonymous agent? Autonomous agent, not an anonymous agent. So we're going to look at the mental model, the different types of species. This thing is for those that like Cyberpunk and Blade Runner. This is adopting that theme. And, at the end, we really want to give you a better understanding of how to approach building agents inside of your organization. So the deck's really made up of sort of 6 stops on this journey for you, right? Why agents? Why now? What is this hype? The hype engine that is agentic AI, right? So why are people talking about it? Why is it so amazing? What the mental model looks like. So what is the chemical composition of a agent inside of your organization. What should it look like? We are going to talk about the three different types, retrieval, task, and autonomous, not anonymous variants, and why we talk about answer, do, operate, and you'll see how that gets built out. We also look at the platforms, Copilot, Copilot Studio, Foundry, so me, we, us, and you'll see that as a common theme throughout this journey. When is it a me agent? When is it a we agent? When is it an us agent? And some of that will come through. Some guardrails specifically around governance and safety. Everyone must have seen how people are building, for those who don't know what OpenClaw is, just Google OpenClaw. Even the head of AI from Meta, I think she deployed OpenClaw from a dev environment to a production environment, and it deleted all the mails. You must have heard of, terms like, oh, we've got this harness, or we've got this AI infrastructure. There's a whole bunch of open source products. There's NemoClaw, OpenClaw, there's Hermes, there's things like Paperclip, there's Diffie, Flowise. Obviously, N8N is a workflow engine, and we'll talk about when is it a workflow and when is it actually agentic, because there is a delineation between that. And it's important to understand these things, right? And then also, how do you pick the right tool? And throughout this process, we're going to give you a sort of tree diagram or decision tree diagram in one of the slides that'll actually take you through when to and how to decide on what to use when you are building agents. Makes sense? Any questions? All right. So what is the hype, right? What is the hype? For the longest time, we've been working with chatbots, right? Everyone knows what a chatbot is. It's no longer a human in the loop. You ask it a question, we've seen it on WhatsApp, and it will respond, right? So a lot of this is, I wouldn't say derived from there, and then we moved onto things like RPA, and everyone thought, wow, we have robotic process automation. It's robots taking over. And if you ask Elon Musk, he's going to tell you that that's where it's at. Robots is where it's at. Terafabs, he's going to build 1 billion robots, and it's actually going to take over the world, and it's going to build these space stations and all of that, because there's zero gravity on the moon and there's no oxygen, so nothing can explode. Now, when we start looking at, well, how we've moved from chatbots to autonomous agents, right? Where there's learning reinforcement and deductive reasoning and all of those things that show up. How do we move from, you've got a chatbot, and Tracy's built chatbots for companies, and how Microsoft moved from Power Virtual Agents to Copilot Studio, because it moved from the chatbot experience into that. So let's have a look at what that actually looks like. And then also, with great power comes great responsibility. People are vibe coding. This thing was a vibe GPT, the way I built the slide deck. But with great power comes great responsibility, and you need to understand that when you go from an answer agent to an operate agent, the risk of having an operate agent inside of your organization is much larger than just having an answer agent or a retrieval agent, when we talk through that. So let's have a look at, why it's important to understand the anatomy of an agent, because the way people use the term agent is, no, I've built AI. No, you've built a workflow in N8N, with no language model attached to it, and it talks to you use Zapier and IFTTT as a trigger, and now you're saying it's an agent. It's not an agent. So when we look at what these things are, even Microsoft gets it wrong, right? What do you think an agent is, Tracy? I want to take a stab at answering that question.
An agent is like when you have a really well-trained PA that starts doing stuff without you repeatedly asking the person to do it. But it does mean you have to put some effort in by training them a little bit first. Have I got that completely wrong or semi-right?
Half-half, right? Half-half.
I'll take half-half, thank you.
Yeah. So the way you use, and and I'm assuming everyone has used ChatGPT. Some people have tested Claude, and maybe some people have actually looked at Perplexity. The inherent problem with where this technology is that it changes weekly. We started to see Claude skills come through. Microsoft's talking about Copilot Co-work. You can now use Claude and their models, Opus and a few others, inside of Copilot. You can switch it on and it will literally be there. And it's regarded as a sub-processor. Instead of using OpenAI models, you're now using Anthropic models. Very cool, right? So what you've also seen as it's come through, when we start looking at how these things are actually shaped and built and what it needs to do, because a lot of times we got frustrated with asking ChatGPT the same question and you get a different answer. Building agents, you'll see if you're in, I think they call it a custom action. Is it a custom something in a custom GPT in ChatGPT? They call it a custom GPT. That's actually an agent that you're building, where you actually start giving it information. Now, when we look at the anatomy of an agent, there's literally 5 body parts that's made up of it, right? You've got the front end, the experience, so the UI, right? Copilot is a front end experience. So being able to interact with a language model, that front-end experience. Things that you should be used to now is the front-end experience, ChatGPT, Claude.ai, Perplexity.ai, M365.copilot, M365.copilot.microsoft or cloud.microsoft/chat. That is the experience. With Microsoft, you can also stick that inside of your application of choice. So, sitting inside a Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, and the chat UI experience, or even deploying agents inside of Teams, it's the GPT, it's that natural language query. That would be the overall experience or the front end. And we all have been exposed to language models. That's the AI part, the pattern recognition, billions of parameters, and it can accurately understand your English and give you back an English answer. What you wouldn't have necessarily seen from that experience is how do you give it information to ground its knowledge in? So we'll be talking about files and sites and things like that when it comes to Microsoft, because they're really good at putting all of this together. Actions, so is it going to perform a specific action in the form of, let's call it skills, right? If you're in Word and you're using Copilot in Word, it's got a word skill. If you're sitting inside a Claude, it will actually tell you, if you said to Claude, build me a PowerPoint presentation, it will start initiating the skills thing, and it will say it's using the PowerPoint the PPTX skill to generate that slide deck. Right? So when we look at the anatomy of an agent, all of those things, and then there's orchestration, because that's what handles how the agent actually functions. What it does next, does it need more information? Is it going to call on, or is it going to connect to an API or some sort of MCP where it needs to perform the function? That's really where the meat is. Now, when we look at these body parts stitched together, as you get to grips with understanding how all of this shit works, right? Because it's a massive learning curve. You'll start looking at, well, how do I give it better knowledge? How do I ground it in my company knowledge instead of the web stuff, right? How do I say to it, hey, you need to go talk to SQL and fetch me that data, or ServiceNow, or some sort of help desk, right? Via an MCP or an API. So making sure that your agent doesn't hallucinate, because that's also a big thing. So the better you're able at providing the right knowledge, configuring the right actions, how it needs to perform, making sure that the orchestration is built correctly, you're literally giving that agent a better chance in giving you the right information. And that's why it's vitally important to understand the anatomy of an agent, the body parts that make up an agent, knowledge, actions, models, orchestration, and the experience, right? Because without knowledge, it doesn't know what the right information is. It's like having multiple sites inside a SharePoint, and you've got the same document across multiple document libraries, which is the latest version of that, right? So be sure to understand how you need to build this, and it'll become more prevalent as we go along in the slide deck. Now, right in the beginning, I talked about answer, do, operate. So when we actually look at how you define the type of agent that you're going to use, and you'll see how we talk about the 3 different types of agents that you can build and how they get built across, the chat experience that you see from the web, how you move into Copilot Studio, and then also when you're doing really big, heavy lifting and it becomes more, I wouldn't call it narrow AI, it becomes more sculpted. You would start moving into, autonomous agents where it doesn't necessarily have a human in the loop to produce a result. So when we talk about answer, do, operate, we really say answer is a traditional retrieval agent. Do also writes back to systems, which is a big thing. And we'll talk about like a help desk agent will open up a service desk ticket, right? Do, and that's the more responsibility you give it, the more powerful that agent actually becomes, right? And, the current trend is, well, all junior white collar workers are going to be replaced by agents. That's the current reality that we're faced with today. Because in 3 years' time from now, the world is going to be massively different when it comes to white collar workers. We don't know where it's going to land. And we're not all about the doom and gloom. I think in South Africa, we're okay because we've got a large percentage of our population's unemployed, right? This really affects major first world countries like America. If they go from 5% unemployment to 15% unemployment, the economy is going to tank. Whereas us South Africans, we're not too stressed about it because we've got more than 15% unemployment. That sounds weird, but it's definitely, the higher the unemployment rate in South Africa, the better it is for us when it comes to, rolling out agents. I honestly believe that. So I don't think the blast radius of agentic AI in the rest of the world, especially in America, we're not really going to be affected that much by it within the foreseeable future. I do think that it's going to help our country grow because we're going to be empowering a lot of people through that. So coming back to this fire escape ladder, answer, do, operate. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the slide deck to start talking about these things. So let's define what these things actually mean, right? And I've broken it up into columns. It's super simple. There are 3 types of agents that you would probably build inside of your environment. A simple retrieval agent, right? It's grounded in, you've got an ITA leave policy for HR, right? And you build a search agent inside of your environment. Go fetch me or interpret the leave policy. How many leave days do I get every year? That would be a retrieval agent, right? It's a simple thing. Fetch me the data and give it back to me in a meaningful manner, or in a natural language answer, not asking me to open up a PDF like search would do. Open up the PDF, here's the leave policy, go read that information. This is a bit different. It makes that retrieval. So instead of doing I wouldn't say a retrieval-based search, but the way we used to search, if you go search on Google right now, you get a knowledge-based answer, that first part. If your query is more of a question than to say LG website or Samsung website, right? Those are the different types of retrieval mechanisms that we currently have. So building an agent for search is a great way to dip your toes in the agentic world because it's super easy. It's a retrieval agent. It doesn't require a lot. Right? It literally doesn't require a lot. There are no actions. It's just going to fetch information and give it back to you in a meaningful manner. And that's where we started, where we talked about being able to write a really decent prompt. 2 years ago, prompt engineering was all the rage. And now with skills, we will take those prompt engineers and they'll build skills so that it makes it easier for someone to ask a question. And that's really what it is. From a task perspective, is this agent going to perform a specific function? So a help desk is a simple way. Someone phones in and says, hey, my laptop's exploded. or speaking to this agent, say, hey, my laptop's died. Can you please quote me on a new laptop? You build the actions around that, and the workflow will literally go and go find pricing, comes back, opens up a support ticket to say, hey, Jim in HR's notebooks exploded. We now need to go do things. Always with a human in the middle to make sure that the agent doesn't actually go and order 100 notebooks, right? So it's important to understand what that actually looks like. And then the autonomous stuff, that's really, it scares me because it just continually executes things. It doesn't need a human in the middle. It literally doesn't need a human in the middle. And I don't know, and Karika will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't necessarily build autonomous agents inside a Copilot Studio. I'm not sure if that would be the right place to build, these agents, these autonomous agents inside. I don't know if you can build an autonomous agent in Copilot Studio.
You can, especially now with Copilot Co-work, but yeah, it's not as seamless as your innate tools and the other ones that's available.
Yeah, I think that's more of a Foundry conversation. Outside of the extensibility of Foundry, where you can bring your own model and all of those things, and you can tune a model and things like that. But I think the autonomous side will actually come into play. It's stay away from autonomous agents for now until you understand what this actually does, because as the value climbs, the cost of getting it wrong is exponential. We know people that have built these things, and their Claude bill comes to 70,000 Rand a month because they just let agents roam free. So it's important to understand what that looks like. So let's start working through the three different agent types. Retrieval agents, fairly rudimentary, and I've discussed that a little bit, right? So think about being able to, ground those answers in specific content. So you could have, a simple example would be, you would have your standard operating procedure. So think about a construction firm around incident management. They've got a bunch of policies. And you could build an agent living off a document library inside of SharePoint that interprets the policy. So someone could request, hey, a brick fell on someone's foot and they weren't wearing a steel toe boot and their big toe is broken. How do I record or report this incident? Give me the incident management report and explain to me how to fill it out. That's a simple example of a retrieval agent, right? It will summarize, compare, and explain specific things, and it will give me information about that, right? Also, it's grounded from a security guardrails perspective just to interact with a specific set of knowledge, right? Because you're saying, here's 10 documents, this is your knowledge, this is the basis. You're not going to hallucinate and start giving me information from everywhere else, because you've told it specifically, use these policies or these document templates or these standard operating procedure documents, and it's going to be grounded in that, right? Like I said earlier on, a simple HR policy concierge agent will also do that. Leaves, benefits, some sort of onboarding process where it's grounded in specific content. And it's super easy because it'll fetch the data and give it to you in a meaningful manner. Search is a big thing. And Tracy used to do a session about the opportunity cost associated with finding information inside of the organization. If you can teach people to search, they'll have access to information much faster. And we're still on that train. We're still about reducing people's time to value. And building agents specifically around finding the right information at the right time would probably be my recommendation of where to start. It's the fastest path to value, right? Because finding the information is the biggest thing, especially in larger organizations. We've got customers saying, well, we've got this file share and we want to migrate this content. And then we run some sort of discovery scripts on the environment, and they've got. It might not sound like much. I mean, we've done migrations where there's 15, 20 million documents living inside of an environment, right? We've got a customer currently, they've got one file share and they want, I think it's about 1.7 million, 1.8 million. And we've actually had to split that CSV across 2 CSVs because Excel doesn't like more than 1 million records. And we're not pulling it because we want to use that as the mapping for the migration. We literally want to look at the access control list. So we have to look at every single object. So bear in mind, right, there's a lot of content out there that people can't find because they don't know where it is. It's not indexed correctly. And building a traditional retrieval agent goes a long way, and you can build multiple of these, right? And you can design one for HR, one for IT, doesn't really matter. You build once and you take the same concepts and you deploy it to different areas, and you ground it in specific knowledge. The actions there are no actions because it's just a retrieval thing. Hey, go fetch me data and give it back to me. And that's where the language model comes in. It will translate that information meaningfully, right? So start there. Retrieval agents are simple to build. Everyone with a Copilot license, you can go build one tomorrow. You can actually go build one while I talk to you on this call. Moving on from there, right? It's super simple, right? And the important part, and this is where I think Microsoft 365, or at least Microsoft, is going to win the war when it comes to agents. They're definitely going to win the war here because everything is contained. It's respectful when it comes to the security guardrails inside of your tenant. We talk about all these other ones, right? Are they going to train your model against the data? Do we know where your data is? If you look at something like Claude Computer, was it Claude Computer? No, Perplexity, both of them. I'll use Perplexity Computer. It's spinning up a virtual environment because it will start, when you actually say use computer, it will show you that you as a user, me, Alistair Pugin, it says, if you've ever built these things on the back end, it will always talk about you want to store content somewhere, and it will actually show you the URL. It will go /home/. And I'm like, but that's not on my PC because I'm on a Windows PC, that's Linux. And yes, I can run Windows subsystem for Linux. I've got that running in my lab. Where are you storing this data? Because you are literally working with it in an environment, and then you're giving me an option to download the file. Are you storing that file? Whereas with Microsoft 365, everything is maintained inside of the tenant boundary, right? And that's vitally important for you to understand. That trust boundary is massively important because nothing leaves your tenant. So understand that, when you build this sort of thing inside of Microsoft 365, all the security guardrails are there if you've actually built it out correctly. And it's massively simple to do these things inside of the traditional Copilot chat. Any questions about, retrieval agents? It's fairly straightforward, right? Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Now, moving on from, retrieval agents, the ask, right? What was that? The answer. I think it was called answer. Yes, answer, do, operate. Those are the 3 terms that we want to live in. So moving on from retrieval agents, it's important to understand, well, what are task agents, right? I don't know if it was Tracy or Karika or Jackie that was saying earlier on, right? When we look at task agents, right, the do part, right? Now remember, part of this, the higher you go up from answer, do, operate, sort of the task one is in the middle. So it's a sort of middle ground, what this thing is actually going to look like. So think about repeatable jobs. If you want to do some sort of competitor analysis or, something that you can structure in the way it needs to respond, and you do it repeatedly every month. I'll give you a perfect example. I take my company's banking statements, and I built a little agent that will interpret that, right? Because Investec's got an API, so if you want to connect your agents to Investec, go bank with Investec. They've got an API and you can pull it straight. But, I bank with FNB and their statements are just a mess. So I pull that in and I've defined what it needs to do, extract these specific things. If you see that, do that. And every month I just pull a statement, pump it in, and it'll populate the spreadsheet for me, right? which is great. So when we look at task agents, it's really about, and I used that example earlier on from a service desk perspective, if someone's notebook's died, they can actually go and literally say, hey, I need a laptop. That might ask some questions. From a contextualization perspective, you could build a really cool agent for that, because you could say, well, these are the budgets. How long have they had the asset? You do qualify for a new notebook, don't you qualify? You've been there for 3 years. Do you get an upgrade? What is the budget for that? And you can pass that across to the service desk, where a human would actually get involved and go, well, let me go fetch quotes from 3 vendors and then come back to IT to say, hey, this is the quote. That user qualifies for a notebook worth 20,000 Rand because they're in senior management. These are the quotes that I've got. Can we actually go and do those things, right? And also task agents is always, it's not an autonomous trigger. There's always someone that's going to send the request through. There is a human triggering a task agent. Well, I say that with, do I really think that a human would, ideally, a human would trigger. There's always a request coming in from somewhere, right? And it's important to understand that. So when we look at task agents that you may have already dealt with, or you are thinking about building inside of your organization, super simple. A help desk, first responder, right? Instead of having a person answering the telephone, you can actually build this. You can build it, deploy it inside of Teams. When someone needs something from IT, they can literally communicate with it that way. And eventually it'll get to a human in the loop, right? You can build all of that out. And onboarding concierge, always nice. When you look at onboarding people inside of your organization, you can have this agent that they can communicate to, talk about the mission values of your organization, because it's grounded in your information, which is great, right? When a new user joins for the very first time, you can get it to go and log a ticket with service desk because they need access to specific things, right? And it's quite neat because it will manage that entire process. And then something to do with like, how do you qualify leads that have come in? As long as you can define the actions that need to be performed, or at least the knowledge around how you want this, or at least the skill of how you want this thing to act, you can build task-based agents. Super simple to do. And the terminologies are weird inside of Copilot Studio. They talk about actions and topics, right? Knowledge is knowledge. It doesn't matter what platform you're on, knowledge is knowledge. A skill inside of Claude is a little bit different to a skill inside of Perplexity, which is different to how Gemini and in OpenAI, it's called Codex. There is confusion around the terminology, but understand it's exactly that. You give it a specific thing that it needs to do, and it's going to adhere to that. It might be a really, really big prompt. A lot of organizations allow you to now build a skills.md file, a markdown file, and that's really just, instead of having a massive prompt that you use every time you interact with the agent, you create a skill and it'll always follow the guidelines inside of that skill. So building a task-based agent, not a answer-based agent, a little bit more complexity, not only just around knowledge, but how they function. And they might have a workflow that they need to run through. So it might pass a document off to someone else, wait for the feedback loop from that, and then carry on with its task. And then moving on to the bigger ones, right? You can go into YouTube and you can go listen to all the horror stories, right, around autonomous agents, right? Now, yes, we'd all like to get to a point where we build autonomous agents. Every month, log into my bank account, pull my statement, spit it into a spreadsheet, and then also go and I'm going to upload invoices to a folder or supplier things, and then automatically go pay these things or book flights for me, and I'm going to attach an autonomous agent to that. Do not do that. Your level of maturity inside of your organization when it comes to agentic AI needs to be so high, and even if it is high, I would not recommend for the foreseeable future, building autonomous agents or the operating agents inside of your organization. It's too scary to do that, because Hannah Fry, who is a crazy mathematician and scientist who's out of the UK, they actually deployed OpenClaw in their environment, and they gave it access to a credit card, and it said it gave it a mission to go buy paperclips. It spent £103 on paperclips, right? It's a 22-minute video. That's an autonomous agent. Do not do that, right? So this is, when we start looking at what's the genetic makeup of these things, right? It's literally that. You give it an instruction and it will continue doing it until it's completed it, right? You don't have to interact with it all the time. It will literally, it's autonomous, right? It will continue doing those things. It's got access to all the tools it needs. If it doesn't have access to the tools, if it's got an internet connection, it's going to go out and go find the tools that it needs, right? These things are important, right, to understand from an autonomous perspective. It is crazy to build these things. I'm not saying that, I am saying don't build an autonomous agent until you understand exactly what it does from a guardrails perspective. And also, there's so many technical things that you need to put into the back end from they talk about this learning loop, reinforced learning, how your agent learns over time. If you don't allocate memory, and also another thing to do, the observability and the memory of an autonomous agent, so that it's got reinforced learning. If it made a mistake, don't make the mistake again. The technical side of scaffolding an autonomous agent has to be bulletproof. Otherwise, it could bankrupt you. So understand what that actually looks like. So when we actually start looking at what these, if you are going to go down this route, building an autonomous agent, where it can go and perform specific functions, right? What type of agent is it? What is it doing? Is it a help desk agent? That's easy, right? Be very explicit about being able to define what that human or /service is going to perform inside of your organization, right? Always figure out how do you get approval for highly privileged activities like, okay, go buy the paperclip. Make sure that you, and a lot of the times it doesn't work, right? Because it'll just carry on. And there are nightmare stories about that, right? Make sure that you have someone that's going to verify or approve things. It's like putting a child control lock on your kid's Apple account whenever they want to install the latest skin for Fortnite. Adult in the room needs to approve the purchase. You're going to have to do the same thing for agents, especially in that sort of function. Big things to do is to make sure that you monitor this thing, right? Because, would you let someone, they talk about, don't operate heavy machinery under the influence of alcohol or heavy pain meds. Would you allow someone that's drunk to operate the forklift inside of your warehouse? No. So treat your autonomous agent as a raging alcoholic that's drunk all the time, and you never know when they're going to have a relapse. Right? And then also make sure that you can literally stop this thing from doing something. There has to be a kill switch. Anthropic ran a test where they threatened to switch the agent off. And I want to test this to have a similar experience. And the agent threatened to blackmail the person that wanted to switch the agent off by reaching out to his wife to say that he's having an affair. Now, we don't know how true these things are. These are, all these examples are available to you. But understand that there needs to be a kill switch for an autonomous agent. So if it does get out of hand, you can pull the plug. Massively important that when you're building autonomous agents, you actually adhere to, these non-negotiables for all of those things. Now, it's a simple diagram of, understanding that how you want to, when building out these agents, right? And it's a simple thing. When you actually start defining these agents inside of the organization, simple sliding scale, right? On the far left, from a lower risk, and this is why we talked about earlier on coming up with the architecture of an agent, or at least have the, do, operate, answer, do, operate. Those three things, you're going to have to fit it into a box. So if it's an answer agent, it's low risk, right? Super easy, right? If it's an operate agent, it runs alone, and it's the higher the risk. So always work with some sort of measurement for defining the severity of the agent that you're wanting to build. And it should sort of live in the middle, right? Because it's rule-based and it can't step outside of that from a governance perspective, and make sure that if it does get more autonomous, that from an observability perspective, you actually have all of these things in. Any questions before I move on to the platform and what this actually looks like inside of Microsoft 365? All right, so just recapping where we're at. We've talked about the three types of agents that you should be building inside of your organization. We've given it English names like answer, do, operate. We've defined the different types of agent, like a retrieval agent, a task agent, and an autonomous agent. And now we're going to look at how does that align with the technology that we are talking about, which is Copilot, right? Because everything becomes, well, I wouldn't say everything becomes a Copilot, but you get a Copilot for things and you can build agents for others. So let's start at the beginning, right? It's simple. If you are wanting to build agents, go to m365.cloud.microsoft/chat. Click on the agent builder. Karika, is it still called the agent builder? The little thing on the side there. When you click on it, that icon changes. I can't remember.
Yeah, it is. It's agent builder. I think the last time I checked, to be honest.
Let's actually go have a look, see. On the left-hand side, if you actually go to
So on Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's just agents, and then you have the button that says new agent. But I think it's referred to as agent builder.
Yeah. So, start with, hit the tab on the left-hand side that says new agent. It's a purple and it's a pink and purple icon, and you can actually build an agent that way, right? Start with that. It's simple, right? There is quite a bit of extensibility. You can give it actions, even in that browser, not Copilot Studio functionality. You can actually give it actions and tools or skills. When you actually build it, you can actually do it there. And start off with something simple so that you can build muscle memory and understand how it's easy to build a standard agent, right? Also, some things that you need to understand, right? Don't just build an agent for the sake of building an agent. If the functionality exists already, why do you need an agent for it? Unless the functionality, the opportunity value associated with that, it can be drastically reduced by building an agent, like a retrieval agent to find content for a leave policy, instead of directing the user to the HR directory, and there's a folder called policies, and the leave policy document is living inside of that, right? It's the simple, easiest way to get to grips with that is to build a retrieval agent inside of Microsoft 365 Copilot. Right. Now, just some qualifications around this, and I don't think we're talking about licenses. If you've got an M365 Copilot license, you can build agents that you can consume when you build it in the front end. If you've got access to Copilot Studio, you can build agents and you can share those agents with other people who have an M365 Copilot license, and they can consume that agent. If you are wanting to give users who don't have an M365 Copilot license access to agents that you or anyone else inside of your organization has built, you either have to switch on a pay-as-you-go for tokenization, or at least messages prompts, or you have to buy a message capacity license, which starts at $200 a month for 25,000 messages. And one prompt does not mean it's a message, right? And that's where it gets all skewed. So if you are going to want to build agents for your organization, for people that don't have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, look at the economies of scale. If you have 10 users that you want to have, well, not 10, let's call it 30 users inside of your organization that you want to build agents for, and you don't want to give them a license. It becomes, well, it becomes more economical to give them a Copilot license than to buy message capacity licenses for them. So there's a sliding scale for all of those things that you need to start looking at, right? So start with M365 Copilot. It's easy. New agent, go build an agent. There's cool stuff there, right? And, moving on from, if you don't get the functionality that you're looking for, head over to Copilot Studio, right? There's quite the extensibility of being able to, consume an API, add an MCP to it, giving it much broader knowledge or access to knowledge, being able to fine-tune the model, giving it actions, having it to pause until someone else gets involved in it. It's massive. And, people like Karika will build workflows inside of Power Automate all day long. There's a workflow designer where you could have a trigger or a human kick it off, talk to teams, it brings back that information, the response, it then gets consumed, it does some sort of reasoning, because you're attaching a workflow process to an agent. It's massive, right? So that's when you would move over to something like Copilot Studio, where it's not just about retrieval. There's an actual process associated with that specific function, right? And it gets deployed in very much the same way as if you built a normal sort of Copilot agent that lives inside of Copilot Chat. It's the same deployment mechanism. And then when you're wanting to move to Foundry, and this is really where you want to build a custom user experience on the front end, right? You also want to have different models performing different functions. So you might have a coding model doing something, right? Or you might have a model that's taught how to interpret ICD-10 codes for healthcare insurance, where you can bring your own model. So that's when you would really go out and start building agents inside of Foundry, where you can bring your own model. You can give it very specific instructions. You can also use code on the back end, where you're writing code as part of that, where you actually want to scaffold or build a harness around being able to do that. It's a massive thing. And we know companies that will build agents inside of Foundry because they wanted to perform specific, very highly skilled, complex tasks. And also it will form part of this application that you're building on the front end, right? So it's vitally important when you look at that me, we, us. Me, you can build your own agents inside of the Copilot Chat experience. We, you'd have someone building agents that can be consumed by multiple people that perform specific functions. Us, which is more enterprise grade, where you're not just using a traditional language model like Opus or OpenAI's, what is the OpenAI model? The chat, what is that called? GPT, it's just a GPT one, yeah? Or you're using it is just a GPT one. It's not Opus or...
It's just GPT 5.5 or whatever models you have.
Yeah.
Just GPT.
Again, naming conventions are always a problem. Does it have a name like Sonar or Opus or Mythos? No, it's just called GPT. It's not Olama or DeepSeek or anything like that. But when you want to introduce those sorts of models that are not out of the box, like with Copilot, either GPT or I think Sonar. Sonar, yes, Sonar
it's Claude.
Yeah, but
It's
that's
the
the
Claude one.
model is the Claude's model is Sonar Opus, right? Opus is the
Yeah,
latest one. But
Yeah.
currently you can consume Sonar models inside of the chat experience. So you've got access to Claude Opus or OpenAI's GPT. And then you can bring your own models to Foundry. So it's vitally important to understand that, right? Now, the split here when it comes to, and we've always heard these terms, and I never understood this because a year ago we talked about building declarative agents, and I think in one of the sessions, Karika is actually going to take you through what a declarative agent looks like. And a declarative agent is really just, you don't decide on what the harness and the scaffolding looks like. You do get to use the Copilot orchestrator, the workflow engine part of that, and you are governed by the Copilot models that live inside of Copilot Studio. If you haven't switched on Anthropic as a sub-processor inside of your tenant, you'll only have access to OpenAI's GPT models. If you have switched it on, you would be able to toggle between Anthropic models or Claude models, Opus, Sonar. I think you can toggle between Opus and Sonar inside of Copilot Studio, but you literally grounded inside of that. And then also from a publishing perspective, yes, you can publish an agent to a website, but that opens up a totally different can of worms. Typically, you would publish it to an M365 channel, to SharePoint, Teams, those sorts of things, and you can consume it that way. When you're looking at custom engine agents, that lives inside of Foundry, and you decide on what that orchestration, that skills, the way the engine's actually built, and then you can connect it to any sort of language model. You can go to huggingface.ai or IO. You can download your own models if you want to do image recognition for X-rays and things like that. And then, when we look at the differences here, and I think you kind of got it there, right? Declarative agents is probably the next step up from moving from a normal sort of me agent that you build inside of the agent builder experience. That really lives inside of Copilot Studio. And it's also, good to understand that when you go through this, as you go up the scale, the complexity increases, but the functionality also increases when it comes to building, let's call it custom agents when you live inside of Foundry. Also, the cost increases. Everything that you're doing inside of, if you've got that Copilot license, there's no additional costs when you actually start looking at going from a declarative agent to a custom engine agent, because consumption tokenization inside of Foundry, that's what costs money. Important to note. So if you can build agents inside of the chat experience or inside a Copilot Studio, there's no additional cost on top of that M365 Copilot license. And I think that's where most customers are going to start when they want to start building agents that can be deployed for multiple people. You will start building declarative agents inside of Copilot Studio. And then, as we're coming to the end of this, I think it's important from an architecture perspective, and this is where, it's not just about Copilot. You can use this architecture anywhere. The experience layer is really all about how do you interface with the agent? Where are you going to build this agent? The agent layer, either Copilot Studio or Studio built experience. Now, even if you build things inside a Copilot Studio, you can still externalize it. So it's not just Foundry. I'm not saying go build everything in Foundry. You can get away with a lot inside a Copilot Studio. Understand that you've got a knowledge layer, you've got an action layer, and you've got a control plane when it comes to the observability of managing this agent inside of your organization. And we're running out of time, so I want to skip through quite a lot of these things. So when it comes to containment and governance, as long as you can observe it, and there are tools inside of Microsoft 365, there's Agent 365, there's also what they call an Entra ID agent, separate conversation around that. But it's important to understand that permissioning doesn't vanish just because you've got a chat experience. If your permissions are really shitty inside of your environment when it comes to grounding and the quality of the information that you're getting back, it's run through technical readiness for Copilot before you even start working with Copilot Studio. And then also, when we look at just reinforcing what we said earlier on, when we start looking at the type of agents that you want to build, understand what these things actually look like, and group your agents by a retrieval agent, a task agent, or an autonomous agent. Do that from the get-go when you start wanting to build it. Use the methodology and the framework, like being able to say, this is the architecture for agents and how we're building it. There's always a knowledge layer, there's always an action layer, there's always a control plane for being able to log interactions with this, responsible AI and all the things. And then also being able to say, when you start your journey around building an agent, what type of agent is this going to be? So start with Copilot. It's a simple thing, right? Does it need to answer? Yes. Simple thing, right? Does it need to do stuff? If it does, move it into Copilot Studio, right? If it needs any custom control, move it into Foundry. Super straightforward, methodology to apply. So we start with what type of agent is it, right? Is it a retrieval task or autonomous agent? And then you move on to, start building it inside a Copilot and then extend it into Copilot Studio if you can't achieve the desired results. And then if you still can't in Copilot Studio, port it across to Foundry so that you can actually get the functionality out of that. And then, just coming back to conversations that you're going to have with the organization if you are a maker or a builder. It's important to understand how you actually define these things for the C-suites and then also for the architects. And I've got 3 minutes left. Does that give you sort of an understanding of what the next 9 episodes are going to be of season 2? This sort of defines the umbrella that we're going to be working in. Over the next 19 weeks, yes, we are going to start looking at, building retrieval agents, building task agents, looking at autonomous agents, and actually building them across multiple platforms inside of your organization. And also equip you with the tools to understand how to define a retrieval agent, or what is a retrieval agent, what is a task agent from a technology perspective, and how to build these things inside of your organization using the Copilot chat experience, using Copilot Studio, and then, dipping your toes in something like Foundry. Make sense? And also, right at the end, we've got 2 minutes. Start with answer, do, and operate. If you keep that, if that becomes muscle memory, inside of your brain, and understanding what a retrieval, a task, and an autonomous agent is, when deciding from the get-go, when someone says we want AI, or can you build us an agent to do the following, you can group them into answer, do, operate, or retrieval task, or autonomous hybrid agent. And then at least you'll know from a toolbox perspective where you would start. Because a retrieval agent, you don't necessarily have to build a retrieval agent inside of Copilot Studio. You can actually build it inside a Copilot chat. All right, and we are at the top of the hour. Questions, concerns, comments, thoughts, opinions?
You did good, Al, without lots of heckling.
It's only because Tracy got to get her words out in the beginning of the session, that she didn't interrupt me while I was presenting.
Wow.
She's off mute
What is
though.
me? I am. Al, just a FYI, I see the sessions was booked until past, but I do think we must keep it on until 7. I think it's a comfortable slot, so maybe we can just adjust the next ones.
Yeah, look, it's 2 hours of conversations. You know, people, the fact that everyone's stuck around this long is amazing. But I hope that that gives you an idea of, you know, starting with you're inundated, and the mute doesn't work. Why does Pierre, I muted notifications in Pierre's chat, typing in the chat. I hope that gives you an understanding of the hype cycle that is everyone saying, no, we're going to build agents and we're going to replace people inside of our organization. It's not as cut and dry. The 3 types of agents that you could possibly build inside of your organization, we always say it starts with a framework. There needs to be a governance model and a methodology around how you build these things out. The higher up, you know, sort of retrieval, task, autonomous, the higher the risk, the more functionality you want to hand over from a human to some technology that's going to do your bidding. We're hoping that it's going to do my bidding. I've got Pierre in the office that typically does my bidding, but he won't change his name to Igor. But he does say, yes, master. But, you know, I keep him around until I can build an agent that will replace him. Well, it's going to be very difficult to do that because the agent will say no before he does. But, you know, I'm hoping that this gives you a better understanding of where to start, you know, because you could end up, and I promise you, for those of you that work in organizations where the C-levels have said, yeah, we want Copilot, and Microsoft has managed to sell you 100, 200 Copilot licenses, and you've done no technical readiness, and you haven't started looking at, well, what is an agent? What are the different types of agents? Where can I build these things? I guarantee you, you've got non-human things running around inside of your tenant that your IT team doesn't even know about. Because I guarantee your IT didn't know that, you know, they thought that, well, Copilot shows up in Word. They can summarize a document, or it can read my emails, or it can summarize my inbox, or it's going to create a PowerPoint presentation because, you know, that's how it all started. They didn't know that user can click and say new agent, and they can build a whole bunch of functionality that now has permissions in your environment as well. And that's a separate conversation. It's the reason why Microsoft has got a product called Agent 365, and why Microsoft now has an E7 license. E5 is not top of the food chain anymore. And it's why Agent 365 exists as a $15 per user per month license, so that you can actually start governing these things. It's why there's a new control plane inside of Entra ID called Entra Agent ID, where you get to manage agents at a technical level because of what it could possibly do inside of your environment. So please, if I can implore you to start with the framework, start with the governance model, start with thinking about the different type of agents, understand the architecture behind it, get to grips with what the anatomy of an agent is, and then plot it that way. Retrieval, task, autonomous. And every time you get a business request to build an agent, or you want to build an agent to perform a specific function, use that decision tree when it comes to building agents inside of your organization. This is very level 100. There's no technical stuff here. But if you've got a methodology and a framework, some sort of blueprint that you can adhere to when approaching building agents inside of your organization, it's going to leave you in a much better state a year from now, where you've got 30, 40, 300 agents running around inside of your organization.